Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Anu Sood, and I'm the Director of Product Management at Alessa by Tier 1 Financial Solutions and today's moderator. I hope everyone is doing well, and we thank you for taking the time to join us. So recently, FinCEN and FATF have released various publications designed to assist financial institutions, designated non-financial businesses and professions, and virtual asset providers, or VASPs, in identifying and mitigating risks of virtual currency transactions. Now, CipherTrace is here to provide an exciting presentation on how to apply some of the information provided by regulators so that you can enhance your AML compliance program. So our presenter today is Pamela Clegg. Pamela is the Vice President of Financial Investigations for CipherTrace. She works with governments, law enforcement officials, regulators, law firms, and financial institutions around the world to conduct blockchain forensic investigations. Her education group provides global training in the blockchain investigation of financial crimes, money laundering, and other criminal activity within the cryptocurrency ecosystem. In addition, she's an internationally recognized expert in the use of cryptocurrency in human trafficking and other financial crimes. Pamela has conducted trainings and spoken on cryptocurrency and financial crimes globally, including presentations to Interpol, Europol, and other international and federal organizations. Now, prior to joining CipherTrace, Pamela was the Assistant Vice President, BSA and Information Security for First State Bank. She also has more than 10 years in international investigations, due diligence, and operations, working primarily in Latin America for the U.S. government. Pam has a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Texas at Austin and her MBA from the Universidade Autónoma de Madrid. Pamela is a certified ACAM specialist. And with that, I'd like to hand over the presentation to Pamela.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I loved the Portuguese accent when pronouncing the University of Madrid. It was awesome. Great job.
I need a Spanish accent, though.
No, that's okay. I speak Portuñol, so my Portuguese is a heavily Spanish accented Portuguese, so I loved it. Great job. So we're going to get started today, guys, and some of you may very well be here for the CAMS credit, and that's perfectly okay. But my goal today is to at least give you one takeaway that you guys can go back to your day jobs with, and know a little bit more about the crypto ecosystem and about the red flags that we often find within that crypto ecosystem. So we're going to get started today really kind of talking about what exactly is a VASP, because that's really what we're talking about here, right? We're going to talk about what are the red flags that both FinCEN and FATF, right, Financial Action Task Force, have really kind of outlined for us as far as red flags when looking at cryptocurrency activity, or as FinCEN likes to call them, virtual currency, or as FATF likes to call them and be different, virtual assets, right? Everybody's got their own take on our virtual currency here today. So in order to talk about the red flags, we kind of have to understand, well, what exactly is a VASP, right? So when we talk about what a VASP is, this is a definition that FATF has come up with. This is an acronym that FATF has come up with. Again, FATF likes to be a little different, right? And so we have this term called VASP, which is a virtual asset service provider. All right, so FATF calls them a VASP. FinCEN is going to refer to them as exchangers. Now, the FinCEN category of exchanger is a little bit broader, right? It's not just an exchange like your Coinbase or your Gemini. An exchanger per FinCEN also includes your Bitcoin ATM operators and your P2P vendors and your OTCs, over-the-counter guys, and your third-party payment processors, right? So the name exchanger is a little bit of a misnomer, a little bit with FinCEN. So FATF came out with this brand new terminology and made it pretty broad, as you guys can see there on this slide here when we look at those bullet points, right? So we can see FATF not only includes exchanges, Bitcoin ATM operators or crypto kiosk, but they also include hosted wallets, right? And financial institutions, guys. So any of those financial institutions out there that are looking at custom way, even taking crypto on as collateral for different investments or different loans, they are also going to be considered a virtual asset service provider. All right. So just something to keep in mind as we're kind of going through here. Who is a VASP? Really anybody that touches crypto and swaps it for something else, right? All right. So as we look at, well, why do we care, right? I'm a bank. Why do I care about crypto and what these crypto red flags are? Well, Kenneth Blanco, as we know, and he made it very clear during his last couple of years as FinCEN director that banks definitely need to be thinking about their crypto exposure, right? This was actually a comment made at the most recent ACAMS conference, the one that was just at the end of September here of last year. And he made it very clear in his remarks that if banks aren't thinking about these issues, it will become apparent when examiners visit next. Right. So obviously we all care about our examinations. We all want our examinations to go off without a hitch. So this is why we've definitely seen a marked interest from banks in looking at their crypto exposure, identifying that crypto exposure, and then mitigating the risk that come with the crypto exposure that all banks have. And when I say all banks, I really mean all banks, right? We all have crypto in our banks, whether we know it or not. So that's really kind of the end point there, right? We all have it. So we just have to be able to identify it. We have to be able to mitigate it. And so that's really what we're going to walk through today. What are those red flags that we are looking for in the crypto side of the transactions? Okay. An additional why, all right, is because whether or not you realize it, these exchanges that are out there, the Bitcoin ATM operators that are out there operating in primarily North America, most of our audience today, they are mostly registered for 314B, right? So this is really key because, you know, so we just had a panel not too long ago and we had Coinbase, we had Paxful, we had Bittrex on the panel. I was moderating the panel. It was a human trafficking panel that we were on. And the topic of 314B came up. Right. And Coinbase was very open about their 314B communications. They're like, look, we are happy to communicate with banks. If you think that there is suspicious activity taking place between your bank and Coinbase or your bank and some other type of exchange, we encourage the banks to reach out via 314B. That's why we registered for 314B, right? So they really want to encourage that communication between the banking system and the crypto world. And they also are very willing to work with a bank if a bank doesn't know the right questions to ask, maybe. Maybe you understand, okay, well, Gemini is registered for 314B, but what am I really asking them for? What type of information am I looking for? That's what today is going to help us. It's going to help us understand what are the red flags that Gemini and Coinbase and Kraken are looking for. And then that will help you and guide your investigation, help guide your communications with those exchanges as well as help guide your questions to your customers, whether you're banking VASP, right? You may be banking some Bitcoin ATM operators or some crypto kiosk operators, or you may be banking exchanges. Right. So what are those questions that we want to have with those customers, as well as the questions directly with my consumer customers? Right. I buy and sell crypto via my, small community bank all the time. Right. So if my community bank had a question that they really wanted to ask me about my activity, do they know how to ask that questions, or what are the questions that they would like to be asking? Okay. So another point that we really need to get clear here is that really and truly almost all crypto activity, almost all, begins and ends in the banking system. Okay, so I just mentioned that I buy and sell crypto via a US-based exchange from my community bank, right? Well, the exchanges here and abroad, globally, they're not McDonald's. They don't have a drive-through window, right? So I can't just take my cash and drive up to Coinbase and deposit cash into Coinbase. Doesn't work that way. They don't have a brick and mortar. So I have to get Coinbase my funds somehow. And how is it that we typically do that? Well, we do that through the traditional banking system, right? Whether Coinbase is going to, just do an EFT, whether they're going to, whether I'm going to send a wire transfer. There's some exchanges that are very big. They prefer wire transfers. Some, are happy to let you just kind of link up your accounts and pull money out as you kind of go along and see something that you want to buy. Others will take credit cards. Others will take debit cards, right? There are P2P exchangers that are out there on the clear web, out there on just regular old websites, almost like a Craigslist, and they're selling their own Bitcoin, right? And they're selling their own Bitcoin, and they take credit cards or they take cash deposits into their bank accounts, right? So it would be analogous to me, maybe going to Mexico on vacation and I come back with a whole bunch of Mexican pesos and I just want to sell those Mexican pesos to somebody instead of going to, a regular currency exchange. That's essentially what a cryptocurrency P2P vendor is doing, right? They have their own coins, their own Bitcoin per se, and they're out there selling it on the open market. FinCEN, by the way, requires that those individuals register as MSBs. Most don't. Right? So these are the mechanisms, these are the traditional payment rails that we use to get our fiat, right? Our US dollar, euros, pesos, what have you, to and from those crypto entities, to and from those VASPs that are out there, right? So it's all really stemming at some point, it's touching the banking system. When we think about how criminals could take advantage of the banks and this interconnectivity between banks and exchanges, funds, it's really not that complicated, right? So when we think about a criminal, maybe somebody who's getting cash, they have money mules make those deposits into their bank, right? At placement bank, let's say, okay, they get all this cash built up in their accounts at placement bank. Then they take that cash and they send it to high-risk VASP, a high-risk exchange, right? From their bank account, via wire transfer or an ACH, what have you. And that goes out to that high-risk exchange. At that exchange, then they're able to take their US dollar and swap that into Bitcoin or Ethereum or Monero. And then they can take that out on the dark web, use that crypto in whatever nefarious ways they choose, right? Those funds then come back into that exchange, that same high-risk exchange, or they could send them to a different high-risk exchange. And then at that exchange, they cash out. They off-ramp, as we like to call it, which is where they're just selling their crypto for fiat, for US dollar or euros or pesos, right? And then that comes out of that exchange into what I like to call integration bank in this example, okay? Or it could go back into placement bank. And integration bank only knows that those funds originated from high-risk VASP. And they may not know that it's actually a VASP or an exchange. If, for example, there's an exchange like Abra exchange that uses the legal name Plutus Financial, right? We may not know that that's actually a crypto exchange unless you have the right information to guide you and to identify those transactions, right? We are going to look at the different pillars of risk that we at CipherTrace take in when we analyze the risk of a VASP, right, a virtual asset service provider. So what are these different pillars that we look at? So KYC procedures, number one, right? When we are going to open an account in exchange, KYC, KYC, KYC. Same thing with the bank, right? So we look at their KYC procedures. Okay, I'm going to show you, I have a little bit, two of these we're going to look at more in depth with a couple of extra slides. But yeah, we actually don't just look on their website to see what their KYC is. We at CipherTrace, we're actually going out and opening accounts at all of these exchanges. So we go through the process of KYC. So they might say on their website that they do KYC, and then we get in there and they didn't really require us to provide identification. Or they might say that they do KYC, but then we get in and they say, oh, well, we don't need it if you're going to stay under 2 Bitcoin, right? If you're only going to transact up to 2 Bitcoin a day, then we don't need KYC. Well, I mean, 2 Bitcoin a couple of years ago, that was maybe $10,000, but 2 Bitcoin today, that's over $100,000, right? Without providing identification. So that's really a big deal, looking at those thresholds and how they kind of feed in. The Next one we look at is domiciled location. Now, crypto is very much an industry that is not brick and mortar heavy, right? So this becomes a little complicated when we're looking at different exchanges. We look at where they're registered, then we look at where they're primarily operating from. Then we also look at, where their customers really coming from, who's their customer base, things like that. Where does their compliance officer sit, right? So this can be a little difficult. Some exchanges are very straightforward. Obviously Coinbase, Gemini have very clear headquarters in the United States. They are registered, incorporated in the United States. Coinbase just went public a couple of weeks ago on NASDAQ. So, some exchanges make it very clear. Some exchanges make it hard. Some exchanges say very nebulous on purpose, right? So there's different ways that we approach that, looking at that domiciled location. But of course, that does play an important role when we take into consideration, FATF gray list and different regulatory updates or requirements or lack of regulation in these different countries, right? This one's very straightforward as well. Privacy coin. Do they engage in privacy coins or not? Do they let you trade privacy coins on their exchange or not? Okay, that one's pretty straightforward. That's a yes or no. And then also their fiat capabilities is also something we definitely look at. Just like I mentioned before, can I on-ramp or off-ramp into or out of fiat via this exchange? Some exchanges only let you swap crypto for crypto, okay? Naturally, those exchanges aren't going to pose as high a risk for financial institutions, right, as the exchanges who allow you to swap crypto for dollar, okay? So definitely an important aspect there that we look at. And then the last one, which is really, to me, the coolest one and really shows off the transparency that we have in cryptocurrency, contrary to a lot of the misconceptions out there, is the interaction risk. And I'm going to show you some very specific examples of this interaction risk. But essentially, we can look at all transactions in and out of a particular exchange. We can see all those transactions, and then we can risk rate all of those transactions. Right, so something that you can do from inside your bank, which is essentially what your AML software does for you, right? It looks at all of your transactions in, all your transactions out, okay? We can do that in crypto from the outside of the entity. So that's really, really cool. It really gives us a great transparency. So let's take a deeper dive into just two of those before we jump into the red flags here. When we talk about KYC risk, we group those into three different levels, three different risk ratings, essentially. Okay, so I mentioned KYC, that kind of maybe will play with thresholds a little bit. So maybe I don't have to provide KYC if I'm under a certain threshold. That's going to qualify as a yellow there. That's going to be that middle risk. Okay, if I'm looking at an exchange, particularly most exchanges in the United States, that require strong KYC, like a bank. Okay, when I opened my account at my US-based exchange, I did have to all the type of information I would have to provide for CIP, right? So same type of information I provided to my bank, I provided to my exchange. Those exchanges are going to have a KYC score of green. Okay, and then we have other exchanges who don't require anything. They basically a phone number, which obviously can be, some type of Google phone number. I could get a prepaid cell or whatever I need, and then an email address, right? So very minimal, no identification required whatsoever. So that's how we break those scores down. And then here, what we're looking at is that last risk pillar that I talked about, that interaction risk, where I talked about the transparency that we can get. If we take a look at all transactions in and out of an exchange, right, and we risk grade all of those transactions, then we can really get a sense of with whom is this exchange transacting, right? And how risky are all of their transactions? So we can see here, this would be considered a low risk VASP, right? They have around 1% incoming transactions from dark markets. That's really pretty low considering you can't stop an incoming transaction. You can eventually close the account of the person, but you can't stop that Bitcoin transaction coming into that Bitcoin address. So what we see here is that they may have had some higher risk transactions coming in, still very low, less around 1%, but going out, they definitely mitigated that risk, right? And they didn't allow those high risk transactions leaving their exchange, which is where they definitely have complete oversight. So low risk exchange there, as compared to this one, which is a little bit higher risk, right? We see that this VASP right here, we have them receiving over half of their transactions from other high risk exchanges. So a little bit more elevated risk. And then we can see that they also send out around 7 to 8% of their transactions to other high risk exchanges as well. So a little bit more elevated. However, this guy here is most certainly high risk. Right? So we can see this exchange on the bottom there receives over 80% of their transactions from dark markets. Okay, so most certainly they're not doing transaction monitoring. Most certainly they are not engaged in any way of reporting suspicious activity, right? And then also they're sending out around 74% or so to are also high risk transactions leaving their exchange. So you can see the different tiers here and the different perceptions that you can get by looking at those risky transactions. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into these red flags, guys. These will probably help you really kind of understand a little bit more about what suspicious activity can look like at exchanges and how to really formulate those questions. We're going to look at FinCEN's red flags first. But before we jump into these red flags, I want to spoiler alert, right? A lot of suspicious activity in crypto is exactly the same suspicious activity we have in traditional finance. All right. So you're going to see a lot of overlap here. You're going to see a lot of things that you're going to say, duh, yeah, that's definitely a red flag, right? So spoiler alert, these might not be as earth shattering as you might have hoped because money laundering is money laundering, right? Illicit transactions are illicit transactions, whether we're using dollars or we're using Bitcoin. Okay, so one of the things here now that is going to be a little different with the crypto world is that crypto can be sent and received directly with dark markets, right? So definitely a red flag in crypto is going to be any type of interactions that we can identify at an exchange or a VASP with any type of dark market, any type of listing. You can also see there the second point, right? Customer's address, Bitcoin address or the Ethereum address appears on public forums associated with illegal activity, right? So other websites that might be calling them out. There's definitely websites that we're accustomed to in traditional finance that we have similar sites in crypto, like Bitcoin abuse, different sites like that where you can kind of go and post addresses maybe that were that tried to scam you or were fraudulent. So definitely using kind of that open source negative news search. Most certainly for an exchange, if I have a customer that's logging in from an IP associated with Tor, right, the onion router, so anything there that's going to be associated with dark web as well. And then, of course, where it says on the fourth flag there, it says blockchain analytics indicate. Okay, so blockchain analytics, that's us. That's CipherTrace. Right. And so for those of you guys that aren't familiar really with what kind of the meat of CipherTrace, the core of our business where we got our start was, we are essentially AML software for exchanges. Okay, so much in the same way that your bank employs AML software, right? We are the AML software for exchanges. So we are the ones that alert them when there is a high risk address that their customer is interacting with or that their exchange is sending to a high risk address. So if our tool, CipherTrace, identifies an address as a darknet marketplace or darknet vendor, right? Then the exchange is able to also identify that this individual, that customer is engaging with a darknet vendor. Okay, so those are really pretty much your basics there. The other kind of one intermediary that you might have between the dark web and an exchange would certainly be a mixer, or as regulators like to call them, tumblers. So utilizing a mixer or a tumbler, which essentially is taking your dirty coins that are tainted because they're from the dark web and then running those into a mixer. And then on the other side, you get clean coins. It's literally a money laundering operation. It's the literal definition of laundering money. So they take your dirty coins, they either mix them for you, or they pull out of a different reserve and give you clean coins on the other side. But again, companies like CipherTrace, we identify those mixers and tumblers so the exchange can know, oh, these funds are coming from a mixer or tumbler, and then also apply the appropriate risk-based approach there as well, right? So that is one of the differences looking at that dark markets. This is really where we're going to see a lot of overlap, is looking at the red flags for unregistered or illegal P2P exchangers. Okay, these are those guys that I just mentioned a minute ago. You know, I have extra Bitcoin, I want to go out and sell it, almost like on a Craigslist type site. Of course, there are exchanges like Paxful that do require KYC for the P2P vendors that are on there, but there are plenty of sites out there that don't require any KYC or just require me to create a username, and then I can engage in those P2P transfers, right? So when we're looking at that, you're definitely going to see an overlap between banks and the P2P vendor, because I somehow have to get the money, right? I somehow have to get the dollars that I'm doing this P2P swap for, okay? Back in 2016 or so, 2017, in the earlier days of local Bitcoins, there was an option to actually meet in person and do a swap. So if I were selling Bitcoin and somebody wanted to buy that Bitcoin and we both really wanted to stay off the grid, we could agree to meet at a Starbucks. They could bring me the cash. And then once I, verified the cash is here, I counted it, I would, quite frankly, from my phone, send them the Bitcoin right at that moment. So that was one way. Those have really kind of died down. They're not, I don't see them as much as we used to see them. But definitely for exchanges, if I notice that a customer is engaging in P2P transactions, right? Again, the exchange is going to be able to tell that that Bitcoin came from maybe a Paxful or a local Bitcoins, okay? It would definitely raise my antenna as an exchange with respect to that customer, right? So why is the customer always engaging in P2P transactions? There very well are legitimate reasons for the P2P transactions, but maybe it's not something that falls within that customer's expected behavior. Or maybe those transactions are quite large for the P2P, where I'm paying a higher fee, or I'm not getting the best exchange rate or something like that. So P2P transactions most certainly are red flags if engaged a lot. And then also, we talked about this difficulty of domiciled location, right? So, FinCEN points out, these are red flags when you're looking at unregistered foreign MSBs, unregistered foreign exchanges, right? Why is the customer always receiving Bitcoin from, Yobit, which is a Russian exchange that loves to take in transactions from the dark market, right? So why is the customer always receiving their Bitcoin from that exchange? Or why is the customer only using an exchange, that may be located in one of the gray list, FATF gray list countries, right? So looking at these other exchanges that the exchange customer is interacting with as well, in addition to my exchange, or the source of their coins may be these other exchanges, that's also going to possibly raise red flags within that exchange, okay? The other thing to think about with foreign-based exchanges, some cooperate with law enforcement, but others certainly do not, right? So that's another thing that we also want to think about when we're investigating, when law enforcement, whether it's FBI or IRS CI or HSI or Secret Service, are investigating cryptocurrency. We want to have exchanges, hopefully, that do cooperate with law enforcement, will play ball and will answer a subpoena that is sent to them if we are engaged in a legitimate investigation, right? There's legitimate crime case going on, right? And then again, we are mostly aware of higher risk posed with crypto kiosk operators. Again, just like exchanges, I like to say not all crypto kiosk operators are created equal. We definitely have crypto kiosk or Bitcoin ATM operators that go above and beyond. They have really sound AML programs. They are not hard to find. You can very well identify them. They definitely are on the ball when it comes to suspicious activity reporting, when it comes to record keeping. Their thresholds are pretty low as far as record keeping threshold and when I need to show ID at the kiosk, things of that nature. But then we also have other crypto kiosk operators that like to toe the line between regulatory requirements and, kind of letting their customers get away with what their customers want to get away with. So understanding the risk associated with those crypto kiosk operators, the Bitcoin ATM operators, is also very important. This is also key and considered a red flag, area of red flag for exchanges. Is my customer buying all of their crypto at the crypto kiosk and then sending it into my exchange, right? So why are they doing that? Why are they going to the crypto kiosk and buying their Bitcoin there instead of maybe they should just be sending me, just a really simple EFT and then buying that crypto directly at the exchange? So all of this can come into play too when looking at those red flags. All right, so that was FinCEN, looking at FinCEN's red flags. Okay, so again, FinCEN, very specific, obviously, specific to the United States. When we're looking at FATF's red flags, these are more recent. These were published in September of 2020, so just last year, fall of last year. And I will say this about the red flags. There's a lot of them, right? So FATF was very thorough in looking at these red flags and producing them. But also, I highly encourage you guys, especially if you're already banking crypto MSBs, definitely go out and pull this report from FATF. They have some really great case studies in here. And obviously, we don't have time to go over the case studies today with our hour session, but there's some really great case studies in there. I give FATF kudos for putting those case studies that are very applicable and very easy to understand. Sometimes case studies, can be a little extrapolated and it's a little bit hard to follow along, but these are some really good ones. And again, there's a lot of them. I'm not going to read through all of them. Have no fear. We will not read every single one, but they are all in here so that you guys, when you do get a copy of these slides, you will have all of those red flags available to you. But also, feel free to pull the FATF report as well. Okay. All right, so let's dive right in. FATF, red flag indicators for transactions. All right, so guys, remember I told you that a lot of this stuff is going to be really similar to traditional finance, right? Red flags that we're going to see in traditional financial institutions. Structuring occurs in crypto as well. Okay, I mentioned those little thresholds that some exchanges have. So I could do, maybe under 2 Bitcoin a day without providing ID. We'll see people structure and take advantage of those thresholds. We'll see people structure and take advantage of, other types of thresholds that exchanges might have on the level of accounts that they have. Right. So if I want to, go to the next level, say at Gemini, maybe I have to provide an additional identification or I have to do an additional test deposit or something of that nature. So we definitely see structuring. We see structuring at crypto kiosk, Bitcoin ATMs as well. Right. And, the red flags there, guys, they're really similar to structuring red flags you would see at a bank. Okay. So depositing, pulling them out almost immediately, like maybe I structure in all of my little deposits. And then once I get them all in, that I send all of those funds off somewhere. Okay. Same types of red flags, again, that we see in the traditional financial institutions. So how can blockchain analytics and crypto intelligence mitigate these? Well, it's quite simple, right? Similar to AML software, right? We're going to be looking at the risk scores. We're going to be reviewing all those transactions to the same deposit address at an exchange, maybe multiple deposit addresses, okay? Looking at the jurisdictions of the VASP, right, that those structured funds may be coming from, things like that, okay? And then setting up those alerts on those transactions to the same deposit address. Okay, so very similar to what we would do with our traditional AML software, right? The next set of red flags goes into, again, similar type circumstances for traditional banks. We're looking at source of funds, right? So what is this large initial deposit, right into a bank, into your bank account. Same similar thing for an exchange, right? We have a large initial deposit into the exchange. What's the source of those funds? What's the source of that initial deposit? What about when a new user does a large deposit and then immediately tries to swap that out for a different crypto, or withdraws those virtual assets and then tries to send the entire balance from the platform, right? So we might be looking at something that more was being used as a funnel account, right? Or just trying to layer those transactions in some way. Okay. So again, with blockchain analytics, we can do a deeper analysis most certainly of the source of those funds. What's great in crypto is that we don't just get to go one hop back, right? So if somebody, i.e. your customer, walks into your bank and they have a cashier's check from Wells Fargo, well, you know that those funds originated at Wells Fargo, but you don't know how they got to Wells Fargo. Whereas with crypto, we can keep going back because we can see all of that on the blockchain. So we could go beyond one hop, what we like to call hops. We can go 2 hops, we could go 3 hops. We can keep going back until we really identify the true source of those funds. Right. Okay. Transaction patterns. Again, this is going to be somewhat similar to what we would see in the traditional banking sector. Hey, using multiple virtual assets or using multiple accounts at multiple exchanges, right, without really having a business explanation. So you have somebody who's always bringing in checks or cashier's checks or doing wire transfers to and from lots of other banks, and they're just a consumer and they don't really have a business reason for that. Frequent transfers, right, within a certain period. Okay, so maybe one person, it's not just one person, you have multiple logins from different IP addresses. Okay, that's another thing that exchanges look for. Same type of characteristics that you guys look for. Something that we look for in human trafficking, right? We have deposits or ATM withdrawals that take place in different physical locations. Okay, so all of a sudden this debit card is being used in Chicago, and then it's being used in Washington, D.C., and then it's in Miami, and then it's here, right? Or we have branch deposits that we would look for, maybe money mules, right? Somebody's depositing cash in D.C., and then that same day somebody else is depositing cash, in South Carolina or something. So just looking at those different geographical characteristics and attributes that we can get, looking at the account. And then typical money laundering, right? If you look at the fourth flag down, conducting virtual asset to fiat exchange at a potential loss, right? We all know that old trick, right? Money laundering, average cost of laundering funds is about 15 to 20%. So they don't care if they take a 15 to 20% loss if it's going to launder their funds. Okay. So again, transactional patterns can be very similar, right? Just kind of understanding and applying those to the crypto world. Okay. So again, how would we apply crypto intel, blockchain analysis to this? Well, we're going to be looking and doing periodic reviews of our customers. So just in the same way that we would do EDD in the banking sector, exchanges are also going to do that with any customer that they would deem that poses a higher risk, right? Looking at the geographical interface. So we're looking at, again, we're trying to get a geographical picture of that. So looking at IP addresses from where they're logging in to their exchange account, things of that nature. And then also setting alerts for high transaction numbers, okay, for a particular address, just like an account, right? Something of that nature. All right. Now, this is really going to play into privacy coins. Okay, so we're really looking here at more of a privacy coin use or utilizing the P2P transaction or the P2P vendors that are out there that don't require KYC. Okay, so anybody who's trying to really obfuscate their identity in some way in crypto may choose to only use privacy coins. So anybody whose, asset portfolio is, only contains Monero or only contains, Beam or Grin or something, one of those privacy coins, that would raise a red flag. Again, just as FinCEN had, anybody who only transacts to or from P2P exchanges, P2P exchange websites, right? That can certainly raise a red flag for an exchange, okay? And then again, the last one there, similar to the dark web, utilizing mixing and tumbling services, as well as privacy wallets, as we would call, like a Wasabi or a Samurai wallet that runs your transactions through CoinJoin transactions, which essentially just takes your transaction and mixes it with a lot of other people's transactions so that it's hard to figure out which transaction was which that I was following. Okay, so they are actively engaging in ways to anonymize their transactions. Okay, so we, again, can alert the exchanges to the fact that A, those were P2P exchanges, those were P2P exchange addresses, right? Or dark web addresses, or that was a mixer or a tumbler or a coin join of some sense. Okay, so all of this is identified within the CipherTrace tool. So that allows the cryptocurrency exchange to identify that activity as well. All right, just a few more slides here, guys. I told you there were a lot, but we've just got about 3 more slides of red flags here left. When we're looking at senders and recipients, right? So we're looking at everybody involved here. This is pretty straightforward. This is mostly behind the scene type activity. Okay, at the exchange, you know, trying to, same stuff that you guys would see at a bank, trying to open an account frequently with the same VASP from the same IP address, right? Or trying to change their addresses on their accounts a lot. Okay, you can see here discrepancies between the IP addresses. Customers' virtual asset address appears on a public forum. Negative news, right? Negative news information, guys, right? And then also here, looking at the age, the average age of the customer, you know, doing a little bit of profiling there. We do, and we have most certainly seen elder abuse scams move into cryptocurrency without a doubt. They are rampant in cryptocurrency. So, you know, you have somebody who opens an account, you know, in Virginia, and they are, you know, an older individual, and then all of a sudden you see logins coming from, you know, Latvia, right, to that exchange. Most certainly that's a high risk there. And then the last couple ones, just other unusual behavior, same type of thing, right? Different IPs, things that don't make sense, use of language in the messages that don't really resonate with an individual who's supposed to be located, you know, in a certain geographic area, and it just, if something feels off, right? Same types of red flags that we look for as well. Okay, source of funds, very straightforward. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on this. Source of funds. What are the source of funds? Okay, and I think this is the last one. Geographical risk we've already talked about. Domiciled locations, and we're gonna jump there to the last slide. All right.
And thank you for everyone for staying on for the whole presentation. Thank you to Pamela for a great presentation. Thank you for Nicole in the background, who's trying to collect all the questions and provide some input wherever she could. And we hope to see you next time at our next webinar. So with that, I'd like to close today's presentation.